Hello there, my very good friends. Andy Murray here for What Culture Wrestling, here with a solo Sunday news update. Now, if you're wondering where my partner in crime is today, it was his stag do last night. He's getting married next month, so I imagine he's a little bit under the weather. I am too, but trust me, if you saw the stuff that Adam Wilborn consumed last night, you would understand his absence. Anyway, we're going to run through our usual kind of news report, only just with me. We're flying solo. We're going to do some Twitter questions at the end. We're going to have our and finally, but we've got some big stories to run through as well. So let's get through them. We're going to talk about how the wrestlers are reacting to Super Showdown, which went down in Saudi Arabia on Friday night. We're going to talk a little bit about the Battle Royal, the 50-man Battle Royal, in which WWE made a rather hilarious mistake. We're also going to talk the latest on Matt Riddle shooting on Goldberg during the event and why he did it. And then we're going to get to good old Jon Moxley, who has had a few pointed words for Triple H over the past couple of days, and a new interview has some even bigger shots. But without any further ado, let's dive in to Super Showdown. And we've got a report here from Dave Meltzer on Wrestling Observer Radio, who reports that the backstage reaction, perhaps unsurprisingly, to this whole mess of a show has been overwhelmingly negative. Now, I've got a couple of choice quotes here. It was a long spiel from Dave. He went on and on and on. He dived into it really deeply, but this is the most important stuff. So I quote directly from him here. "The people who have been in contact with me, as in wrestlers, other people who are employed by the company, I know one person told me they had a good time and they were happy, and a couple of others were just like, this really sucked." So he goes into a bit more detail. He speaks about Kevin Owens here, who of course decided to pull out of the event at the request of his family. Another quote, "Most of the people knew they shouldn't have gone, but they didn't. You know how Kevin Owens did it?" And this was actually brought up to me. How Kevin Owens did it shocked WWE. Because one thing is Daniel Bryan is a top guy and they already let him get away with it in the past, and he's still one of the highest paid guys there, but they didn't expect Kevin Owens to pull such a stunt, it would seem. Another quote here from Dave. He says that most guys just didn't want to rock the boat. Some people actually wanted to go, but he heard that most thought that they shouldn't go. It was an awfully long trip. One person told him that if it was up to them, they would never go back again, but it's not up to them, so it doesn't matter. Others, well, they just straight up said it sucked. So this really shouldn't come as a massive surprise. I mean, the Saudi Arabian shows are the most controversial thing, perhaps in wrestling today. They are part of a wider campaign to rehabilitate the country's image, and they are funded, of course, by the government. They're very, very controversial. They're never, ever not going to be a major talking point, and it seems that that is reflected in WWE's backstage area as well. Now, there is a few more details here from Dave. He says that traveling concerns were a major bugbear. Apparently, everyone got back into the USA on Saturday, and they were made to go straight to work on shows in California. So on Sunday, today, they have shows in Fresno and Stockton. Then they have a SmackDown Live event in Reno, Nevada on Monday, as well as the Raw taping. And then on Tuesday, you got the bloody SmackDown taping. It is no rest whatsoever. If you went to Saudi Arabia right now and you are a WWE wrestler, you are probably absolutely goosed. So fingers crossed they at least received a nice little paycheck for this weird wrestling pay-per-view. And speaking of weird, how about that 50-person Battle Royal? That was one of the strangest and most crowded matches I've seen in a long time. They didn't even go for the Royal Rumble format. That would have taken ages, of course. They just started off with 50 people in the ring. It was crazy. But here's the thing about this 50-person Battle Royal. It didn't have 50 people in it. It had 51. So if you go back, you pause it, and you count up the number of bodies in the ring, there are indeed 51. This was pointed out to me by What Culture's own Benjamin Richardson this morning, and it's kind of hilarious, isn't it? WWE go to all these efforts for these things, and then they can't even get the number in a bloody Battle Royal, right? Cool. Good. But perhaps it shouldn't be such a massive surprise that WWE cocked this whole thing up. I've got another quote here from Dave, who spoke a lot on Wrestling Observer Radio about what went into the planning of this Battle Royal, and it doesn't seem like a whole lot did. He says that not a lot of effort went into the whole thing, and this should have been apparent when there was no real confirmation of the participants or the format that the match would have until a couple of days before. Here's a direct quote from him on how the thing went down. "There were people who very much understood that the booking was horrible throughout so much of the show. For the guys in the Battle Royal, it was very much like going through the motions because the whole thing was just thrown together and there were no showcase spots or anything like that. So there were people in not kind of a great mood because you're flying there for this kind of match that can't be good because there's no thought been put into it and you're just kind of there as a piece of meat. Now, of course, the match concluded with Mansoor, who is of Saudi Arabian heritage, scoring the win. It was a nice crowd-pleasing moment, but that was really the only thing that happened of note. Otherwise, it was really lackluster. There were no surprise names there, apart from one of the Authors of Pain returning from injury. There was not a whole lot else. It just kind of existed. It filled, 20 minutes of airtime, and then we got on to that main event, which we won't talk about today. I have laughed my last laugh over that match, and now I'm just very concerned over the long-term health of The Undertaker and Goldberg. Anyway, we're going to pivot away from WWE specifically and talk a little bit about Jon Moxley. Now, Mr. Moxley has been all over the headlines lately, whether it's debuting in New Japan, whether it's appearing at Double or Nothing, or whether it's that Talk is Jericho appearance he made the other week. The guy just cannot stay out of the news, and he's back in it today. He has done a new interview with 25 years later, and he is speaking specifically on Triple H and NXT. Another direct quote then, let's fire into it. He says, "I thought it was a bad idea when Hunter started buying the indies. You had Seth and me along with Joey Mercury, and we were able to sneak in a few guys like Luke Harper, Neville and Cesaro," talking of course about an early NXT FCW roster. "Once I was on the main roster and NXT started, which I wasn't a part of, every week Triple H was taking an Instagram selfie with some indie guy. I don't know if he was trying to make himself look cool and get some indie cred or whatever, or just make NXT cool. He basically started buying the indies." Now, Moxley goes on to elaborate on this point. He says that basically, if WWE had gone back and signed Daniel Bryan when he was 21 years old, he'd have never become Bryan Danielson. He'd have never had that epic indie run. All those wonderful matches and feuds in Ring of Honor with the likes of Kenta and Nigel McGuinness, they would have never happened. And that, in the long run, he wouldn't have developed, and you wouldn't have had a moment like WrestleMania 30 because he wouldn't be the same level of performer. He has a direct quote on himself as well, saying that if they signed me at 21, I never would have become anything good. I had to develop first before getting brought in. And that brings up a pretty valid point about the Performance Center as a whole. Because in terms of building wrestlers from nothing to something, it's not actually all that prolific. If you look at the most celebrated people who've come out of that, yeah, you know, your Finn Balor's, your Kevin Owens, your Sami Zayn's, throw out whatever you need, Seth Rollins, of course, throw out whatever name you want. They were already really, really, really strong performers by the time they arrived in WWE. Now, has the Performance Center allowed them to kind of iron out the rough edges and become better sports entertainers? Absolutely, but he raises some valid points about how they develop wrestlers. Sometimes you just got to let people grow on the indies, find themselves, and then you can bring them in, you can sculpt them around the skills they already have, and they can become even stronger. But we're going to move on. We're going to talk about Matt Riddle now. Now, if you're paying attention to Mr. Riddle's social media feed, and you should, he's very entertaining, during Super Showdown, you would have seen a couple of videos in which he shot pretty hard on Bill Goldberg. Now, Goldberg annoyed Riddle earlier in the week. He blocked him on Twitter. He caused quite a stir, and this led to Riddle kind of quoting him and getting into all kinds of gibberish during the show, criticizing his lack of safety, criticizing his execution of a leg lock, being really sarcastic and just having a lot of fun. Now, he has since deleted those things, which is probably wise. He is under WWE contract and he doesn't want to get, fined or suspended or even worse. But he has posted an explanation. So, I'm just going to read this tweet out to you. "I love pro wrestling so much, and that's why I get mad at certain people because they're unsafe, dangerous, and a liability to everyone else. I've worked hard to get where I am, and this is only the beginning. P.S. Undertaker is a stallion and a true legend." So, not exactly dialing back on anything there, even though the original tweets were deleted. You know, Matt Riddle's a fun guy. He's going to do and say kind of what he wants. Anyone who followed his UFC career would know this. He butted heads with Dana White so many goddamn times, and that eventually led to his release from the organization, along with, unfortunately, a failed drug test or two along the way. But I digress. Matt Riddle, super fun, super entertaining guy. Goldberg didn't have his best performance, but you know, if he was wrestling concussed, that might have something to do with it. Anyway, that's it for the news. We're going to pivot over to your Twitter questions, and I've got 3 of them here as usual. So, the first one comes from Darren Cox, who asks, "Has the WWE Super Showdown pay-per-view killed their fan base and any momentum they had remaining? How do you bounce back after that horrific pay-per-view?" Well, I don't know if WWE necessarily needs to bounce back. They are still the biggest promotion in the game. Now, from a creative standpoint, absolutely, things need to improve. Raw can be terrible some weeks, not every week, but some weeks it definitely can be. SmackDown too can be very inconsistent. This pay-per-view shows that they are more than capable of serving up an absolute stinker, even when, for the most part, the pay-per-views over the past couple of years have been pretty good, and some of them have been downright awesome. Last year's Survivor Series sticks out for one of them. But as far as their balance sheet and stuff goes, they are absolutely indestructible. They're not going anywhere. In their eyes, they will say we are the market leaders, and I wouldn't really expect them to change anything. Moving on, Christian Wattengard, and I hope I've got your name right there, pal, asks, is Roman Reigns getting buried surrogately in place of Jon Moxley? Entirely possible. I think that's a very good point, because obviously WWE were kind of blindsided by Moxley. They really let him out on the most favourable terms imagined. They rolled out the red carpet, they gave him a big pat on the back in the hope that someday he would return. Now he's shooting on them in podcasts, he's taking shots at Triple H for signing all these NXT guys, and he's doing big things in New Japan and AEW. I do think that's a possibility, but at the same time, it's Roman Reigns. Yeah, I know he was killed by Shane McMahon at Super Showdown, but it's Roman Reigns. I love the guy, but let's be honest, his presentation over the past few years as the guy has been rather obnoxious. Let's see where it goes. I think it's a little bit too early to jump to any conclusions like that, but if it continues, you've absolutely got a point and you can take a victory lap. Our final question comes from Chop the Viking, who asks, with all the comparisons people want to make between AEW and WCW back in the day, does that make Jon Moxley their Lex Luger? Obviously, they're referring back to the famous incident on the early episode of Nitro when Lex Luger, who had really just left WWE, showed up in WCW just a few years later. Massive shock, huge talent jump, changed the game. It's certainly comparable. Jon Moxley is probably about the biggest name that AEW could have pulled at that event, aside from CM Punk. Now, this is something that we've actually spoken about a little bit in the What Culture office lately. We think that when TV starts for Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Dynamite, whatever the hell the AEW show is going to be, they probably need something similar, right? They probably need a Punk or a Moxley level guy to come in and be that Lex Luger figure for a new era. Certainly not in terms of like in-ring and stuff, but we get there. Look, yeah, I think at this point that's a valid point. I think Luger back in the day was a bigger star. I'm not saying he's a better performer. I certainly prefer Moxley's work, but we'll see how it goes. Maybe, hopefully like a Sasha Banks or someone like that can get out of their contract and be another Luger, because they're going to need more and more to add up. They really do need a little bit more star power on that roster to really get them going. So let's just see what happens. That's it for your Twitter questions. Let's move on to our and finally, and with this feature today, we are going to return to our roots. I really want to thank J-Tray and A-Tray on Twitter for sending this terrible action figure over. This 100% die-cast metal model of The Undertaker is, well, look at the bloody thing. It's one of the worst pieces of merchandise I think I've ever seen in this goofy little sport, and that's saying a lot given some of the absolute crap that we have shown you on this very segment. So thank you very much for sending that over. Just look at his little face. Oh my god. Anyway, guys, that's all for today. Thank you for joining me for this special solo news report. And remember, you can send us your Twitter questions at WhatCultureWWE. We will be back tomorrow. Myself and Adam Wilborn, we will get to those. Of course, you can follow myself at Andy H. Murray if you want as well. I don't have a special letter H today because I can't be arsed. Either way, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit that bell and it'll give you notifications anytime we upload one of these things. And I'll see you later.